A Russian Su-34 fighter bomber rolls down the runway, bays loaded with 500-kilogram winged bombs, and the pilot already knows he won't fly within 50 kilometers of the front line. He doesn't need to. He climbs, releases his payload, and turns for home. The bomb handles the rest, gliding on satellite guidance toward a Ukrainian bunker, a logistics hub, or an apartment building in Kharkiv. For 2 years, that equation looked unbeatable for Moscow. And then something in the equation broke. The bombs started missing. Not some of them, almost all of them. And the fact that Ukraine managed to jam its way out of Russia's most dominant weapon is basically everything you need to understand about how the war has changed in the last 6 months. Russia isn't just losing the drone war or the manpower race anymore. It is losing the air war it thought it had already won. Glide bombs were supposed to be the great equalizer, the weapon that let Moscow pound Ukrainian positions into rubble from a safe distance, draining Kiev's will to fight faster than the West could resupply it. For a time, that plan was working. So how did Ukraine dismantle it? And how is Kiev now on the verge of firing back with its own version of the same weapon? There's no single answer, but instead, a collision of engineering, desperation, and the same Ukrainian talent for making cheap things defeat expensive ones that's defined this entire war. When Russia's Air Force shifted its strategy in the spring of 2023, it wasn't out of innovation, it was out of necessity. The first months of the invasion had exposed a brutal truth. Russia's jets couldn't survive near the front. Ukrainian air defenses, especially the shoulder-fired Stinger missiles and later the Patriot batteries supplied by the West, were hunting Russian aircraft. Moscow lost more than 360 aircraft of all types across the war, including 41 Su-34 fullback fighter bombers, the very aircraft designed to deliver precision strikes, and 18 Su-30 multi-role fighters, according to the Oryx open-source tracking site. So Russia adapted. Engineers at Soviet-era stockpile facilities began bolting cheap wing kits and satellite navigation modules onto unguided fab bombs that had been sitting in warehouses since the Cold War. The result was the KAB series, Korrektiruemaya aviaционная bomba, or correctable aerial bomb, a weapon that could be released from 50 kilometers away, glide on GLONASS guidance, and hit within 20 meters of its target. The cost was a fraction of a cruise missile. The stockpile was essentially limitless. And unlike a ballistic missile that a Patriot system might intercept, a KAB falls nearly vertically from above, flies fast, generates almost no heat signature, and presents a radar cross-section barely larger than a large bird. By early 2026, Russia was releasing as many as 5,700 of these weapons in a single month, according to reports. Along just 150 kilometers of front near Huliai-Polye, Dobropilya, and Sloviansk, French mapper Clément Moline identified 6,600 individual KAB impact craters in a single 3-month window. That is not artillery. That is industrial demolition. Russian Su-34s had found a way to stay alive while wrecking Ukraine from the sky, and Ukraine had no reliable answer. But then came the jammer. Here is the number that changes everything. On a roughly 700-kilometer stretch of the Ukrainian front, Russia dropped 869 KABs in a single month under Lima-Quant coverage. The consequences of those 869 bombs were minor injuries to 8 servicemen, not hundreds of casualties, not flattened command posts. 8 minor injuries from 869 precision-guided bombs. The effectiveness of KABs dropped to 0, a spokesman for the developers of the Lima-Quant electronic warfare system told Forbes magazine earlier this year. This is where the deeper shift comes in. Ukraine didn't build a better missile to shoot the bombs down. It built a jammer that tells the bombs they're somewhere they're not, and the bombs believe it. Lima-Quant, developed by Cascade Systems with Ukraine's Nightwatch military unit, is a strategic-level electronic warfare platform that disrupts the satellite navigation signals the KABs depend on to find their targets. It doesn't destroy the bomb, it simply lies to it. The bomb glides perfectly, following its guidance system faithfully, and lands in an empty field. Think about what that actually means for Russia's air strategy. Moscow has spent billions retrofitting Soviet bomb stockpiles into precision weapons, built an entire operational doctrine around standoff bombing, and trained its pilots to release at altitude and turn for home. And all of that infrastructure can be neutralized by a system that tells the satellite, this is not where you think it is. To understand why Lima-Quant works, you need to understand the specific weakness it exploits. Russia's KABs have gone through several guidance generations. Early models used a basic GPS/GLONASS receiver that Ukraine learned to jam in 2024, briefly neutralizing the bombs by making them miss their targets. Russia responded with a new antenna system called the Kometa 4 CRPA, Controlled Reception Pattern Antenna, a more sophisticated receiver that filters out jamming signals by identifying and ignoring interference from specific directions. When Ukraine expanded its basic jamming network, Kometa 4 largely nullified it. The bombs started hitting again. Then Russia upgraded further to the Kometa 8 CRPA, a 16-element adaptive antenna array that Serhiy Flash Beskresnov, a Ukrainian electronic warfare specialist, confirmed in recovered debris from downed bombs. The Kometa 8 was specifically engineered to defeat Ukraine's existing jammers. Lima Quant defeats the Kometa 8. The developers declined to explain exactly how, for obvious operational reasons, but the claimed mechanism is spoofing rather than pure jamming, feeding the bomb a false satellite signal rather than simply drowning out the real one. The result, according to the Cascade Systems spokesman, is that Russian pilots began experiencing a navigation error 100 kilometers before the bomb even reached the front line. Their guidance systems failed not at the target, but on approach. Russian pilots did not understand what was happening, the spokesman told Forbes, because navigation on these CRPAs was lost 100 kilometers before the line of combat. The Lima system's wider operational record backs up these claims with figures that are almost difficult to believe. In the first quarter of 2026 alone, Lima and Lima Quant variants neutralized 26 Russian Kh-47M2 Kinzhal aeroballistic missiles, the same hypersonic weapon Putin once called invincible, bringing the total diverted since deployment to 58 out of 59 launched at protected targets. Over the same 3 months, the system deflected 33 cruise missiles and more than 10,000 drones. Maxim Skoretsky, head of the Electronic Warfare Department of Ukraine's ground forces, described the result as a genuinely layered defense that catches threats the outer interception ring already missed. And that is the deeper point. Ukraine is not relying on Patriot interceptors worth millions of dollars to catch each incoming bomb. It has built a non-kinetic kill layer, one that doesn't spend ammunition, doesn't run dry, and can cover an entire operational zone simultaneously. Now, you might expect Russia to simply copy the jamming-resistant CRPA technology faster than Ukraine can upgrade its jammers. After all, Moscow knows exactly what the Lima system is doing. Its pilots feel the navigation failures in real time, and Russian engineers have been recovering debris from downed bombs for analysis. Russia's response has been to accelerate production of the Kometa 8 and to experiment with rocket-boosted glide bombs like the UMPB-5R, which extends range past 120 miles and adds further jamming resistance. But here is the trap Moscow cannot escape. The Kometa 8 relies on microelectronics that Russia cannot produce domestically at scale. Western sanctions have severed Moscow's access to the commercial chip supply chains that those guidance components depend on. Every Kometa antenna produced requires imported components, navigated through a sanctions evasion network that is leakier and slower than a normal supply chain. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Lima Quant team has already iterated past the Kometa 8. The Russians upgrade their receiver, Ukraine upgrades its spoofer. The Russians upgrade again, but Ukraine is moving faster because it is building with components it can actually procure. The deeper systemic constraint isn't technical. It's the same labor shortage strangling the rest of Russia's war economy. The engineers capable of designing advanced CRPA systems are the same highly skilled workers that every sector of Russia's economy is already fighting over, in a country where military spending has reached 40% of the government budget and unemployment is at record lows. There are simply not enough of them. But before we get into the other half of this story, the moment Ukraine stopped just defending against glide bombs and started building its own, make sure to subscribe to The Military Show. We post daily videos breaking down global geopolitics and military developments, giving you the full picture of the war before anyone else does. Back to Ukraine's answer to Russia's most dangerous weapon. So what does Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov make of all this? On May 18, 2026, Fedorov stood before a camera and made an announcement that, measured against the scale of what Russia has been doing in the air, reads almost as a declaration of a new phase of the war. Ukraine had built its own glide bomb. After 17 months of development under the Brave One defense tech cluster, a startup called DG Industry had produced the Virivnyuvach, Ukrainian for equalizer. This is not a copy of Western or Soviet solutions, Fedorov said, but an original development by Ukrainian engineers designed to effectively strike fortifications, command posts, and other enemy targets dozens of kilometers behind the front line after launch. The name is not accidental. The Verivnyuvach carries a 250-kilogram warhead, equivalent in punch to Russia's FAB-250, and can strike targets anywhere between 40 and 130 kilometers from the release point, depending on drop altitude. It costs roughly one-third the price of the American JDAMER kit that Ukraine has relied on since 2023. It carries no donor use restrictions, meaning Ukrainian pilots don't need to call Washington or Paris for permission before the release. It was combat tested for the first time on June 23, 2026, with video showing a confirmed strike on a Russian position. And as of that same month, 2 of 8 Ukrainian developers enrolled in Brave One's guided bomb program have already delivered weapons to frontline units. That is the sound of a country that has stopped waiting for other people's weapons and started building its own production line. A country that, 2 years ago, was supposedly weeks from collapse, has now built a guided precision munition from a blank sheet of paper in the middle of a war and gotten it to the front before the year is out. Of course, none of this means Ukraine has solved the glide bomb problem, or that Russia's air campaign is broken. Russia retains a very real, very dangerous capacity to keep raining KABs on Ukrainian cities and frontline positions, and the numbers make that clear. Russian aircraft launched more than 1,800 glide bombs in just the first week of June 2026 alone. Annual projections based on current production rates suggest Moscow could deliver between 68,000 and 120,000 of these weapons in 2026, up from roughly 60,000 last year, according to Ukrainian intelligence estimates. The largest variants, the KAB-1500, carry nearly a ton of high explosive and leave craters 15 meters across. Limaquant's coverage is not uniform across the entire front. The system protects specific zones, not every square kilometer of Ukraine. In areas outside its electronic umbrella, Russian bombs are still landing with devastating effect. And the arms race is not finished. Russian engineers are not standing still, and any current jamming advantage Ukraine holds is temporary until Moscow fields a counter. A RAND analysis from 2024 phrased it plainly. In warfare, silver bullets are rare. Russia has also given its newer rocket-boosted glide bombs enough range to reach cities like Poltava, 150 kilometers from the nearest front, which had previously been considered safe. That range expansion puts rear-area logistics hubs, command centers, and civilian population centers into the threat envelope that once stopped at the eastern oblasts. So Ukraine has not solved this. Russia can still deploy glide bombs at an industrial pace, but the doctrine Russia built around standoff bombing, the idea that its jets could operate with impunity by simply staying far from the front, is now contested at every point along the electronic spectrum. So let's pull all of this together, because the shape of it matters. Ukraine has taken the 2 pillars Russia built its air campaign on, the invulnerability of its bomb-carrying aircraft and the precision of its satellite-guided munitions, and knocked them both out from under it. The aircraft survivability pillar cracked first, as Patriot batteries and F-16s forced Su-34s away from the front line, turning what was once a close air support mission into a long-range standoff problem. The precision pillar is cracking now, as Limaquant spoofs the very guidance systems that made cheap Soviet bombs into precision weapons, reducing 869 incoming bombs to 8 minor injuries across 700 kilometers of front. And while Ukraine defends, it is also now attacking in kind. The Verivnyuvach, built in 17 months, at one-third the cost of a JDAMER, with no foreign use restrictions, has entered combat. The glide bomb war that Russia opened in 2023 thinking it had a monopoly is now a contest between 2 countries building on parallel production lines, and Ukraine is moving faster on both the jamming and the manufacturing side. Yes, Russia can still launch 1,800 glide bombs in a single week and flatten positions across the Donbas at terrible cost, but it is spending its most dangerous air capability to hold a front that is no longer advancing against a defender that is now jamming its bombs and building its own. The asymmetry that defined this phase of the war, Russia drops, Ukraine absorbs, is closing. The question now is how quickly Ukraine can scale the Verivnyuvach from experimental batches to a production line that changes the math for Russian command posts, logistics depots, and the Su-34 pilots who thought they'd already won the air war. To learn more about the drone interception battle that's running parallel to the glide bomb war and the Sting interceptor that's taking down Shaheds at $2,000 a shot, check out this video. And make sure to subscribe to the Military Show to keep up with all the news surrounding the war in Ukraine and global geopolitics.